Lucifer means Lightbringer presents the Mythical Astronomy of Ice and Fire.
Dawn of Thrones 2018 discussion panel. Subverting the Seven. Deconstructing the Archetypes of the Faith. Featuring Crowfood's daughter, Ideas of Ice and Fire, A.Ron Hubbard, and Lucifer means Lightbringer.
If there are two moons, they have to be ice and fire moons, right? I mean, how else would it go?
Okay. So, all right. Welcome, everybody. It's 1 o'clock. My name is Amanda. I go by Crowfood's daughter in the forums. I have a YouTube channel called The Disputed Lands, and I need to talk more into the microphone. We are here for Deconstructing the Archetypes of the Faith of the Seven. We have some other panelists. If you want to introduce yourselves.
I'm LML, Lucifer means Lightbringer. I have the Mythical Astronomy of Ice and Fire podcast. Talk about symbolism and mythology, as I was just saying.
I'm Quinn. My YouTube channel is called Ideas of Ice and Fire. And I talk about archetypes and themes and symbols in A Song of Ice and Fire.
I'm A.Ron, co-host of the Bald Move Network. We do, of course, a Game of Thrones podcast. We also do, during the airing of Game of Thrones, we do a Friday, what we call Spoiler Edition, where we do a deep dive into the legends and myths and prophecies of Westeros.
That's awesome. Yeah, this is going to be a cool panel because we're going to be able to talk about the show and the books pretty much at the same time, because the Faith of the Seven is just the same in the shows and the books. And for those of you who are show watchers, this will, kind of like your weekly episode does, sort of broaden the appreciation for what's going on behind the scenes a little bit.
So the Faith of the Seven. In Christianity, now George R. Martin, he's already, we know that he was raised Roman Catholic. Now, with Christianity, Catholicism, with God, you actually have three aspects of one God. You have the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. So with the Faith of the Seven, it is actually an organized religion. George R. Martin has stated that he doesn't create gods, he creates religions, he creates cultures. And so with that, he's kind of mirroring Christianity and Catholicism in that concept. So what he's done is he's actually created 7 aspects of one God. And that would be the father, warrior, smith, and the mother, maiden, and crone. And it's a really interesting concept to kind of put your head around, because in the way that it's brought about and the way that the characters really take a look at those different aspects, a lot of them see them as one God, and as separate gods. And we actually read in the books, it's a conversation between Brienne and I think Septon Maribald.
That's correct.
Yeah, and she was talking about how it is 7 aspects, and how most people in Westeros don't actually understand that. Most people in Westeros believe that it's actually 7 separate gods. And it's stated that in Andalos, when the actual religion was formed, they were actually formed real beings that had actually walked the earth and had actually manifested themselves.
So what's great about this is that George is basically introducing us to the concept of archetypes through the Faith of the Seven. He's not just using archetypes all throughout the book, he's actually showing you, so almost breaking the fourth wall in a little bit, to tell you it's kind of like one God, but it's kind of like 7. The idea of an archetype is just a character type. Archetype is a word that I guess everybody's probably familiar with, but it's sort of hard to define. You sort of have to know how to use it. But like the smith is an archetype, and Maribald goes on to say the smith is actually any craftsman or worker or laborer. It doesn't have to be a smith. It's a role that people play. Azor High Reborn is an archetype. It's a role that people play. It's not one person. And so with these, when George says he makes religions and not gods, that's because mankind creates religions and gods. I would say that all gods are archetypes, and that's not to say that they aren't real, because they're very real. Archetypes are extremely real. Like when there's there's one of my favorites is the Egyptian god of the Nile. His name is Hapi, Hapi, and the worship of Hapi it basically encodes all the knowledge that you need to farm successfully on the Nile River, which takes very specific techniques. So the storm god, this is just a personification of what a storm is like. The sailors know the storm god really well because you deal with the storm god every time you get out on the boat. And the storm god is always wrathful because the sea is wrathful. The storm god is simply a personification of this aspect of nature. And that's what the archetypes of the 7 are. So the first thing that we need to do while deconstructing these archetypes is understand what George is trying to show us when he talks about the 7 aspects that are 1.
Exactly. And so let's take a look first really briefly at the archetype, the male archetypes. So there's 3 male archetypes and 3 female archetypes, and there's one specific archetype that's ambiguous, and that's the stranger. It's neither male nor female, and it's kind of like almost. I know that Baphomet and some of those horned gods that were demonized later are depicted as androgynous and all kind of both sexes as well, and it's just kind of like a demonized consideration for that aspect. It's considered the embodiment of death, almost, the stranger. So with the male archetypes, they're kind of pretty cool. You have like the warrior, and you have the smith, and you have the father. And when you think of those, you know, those are kind of the accepted roles in society. Okay, you're expected to work. You're expected to eventually have children and go forth and be fruitful. And you might be expected to fight as well. So they're actually kind of cool. But when you take a look at the actual archetypes for women, specifically the mother, maiden, and crone, it's not that cool, really. It's not. It really just surrounds a woman's ability to have children is really what it is. It depicts a woman's basically maturity and way that they're able to conceive and then later, basically wither. And so there's something called the triple goddess. And if you've heard of an author named Robert Graves, he did I, Claudius. Anybody familiar with that? Yeah. Okay, good. So he also was like really big into mythology and really smart guy. And he identified something called the triple goddess. And what the triple goddess actually is, it's 3 aspects of one god or goddess, actually. And those aspects are the mother, maiden, and crone. It's kind of cool, right? So, and little did you know, she's also considered, it's a neo-pagan concept, she's considered the consort of the horn god.
Absolutely.
Which is kind of neat.
It's her job to raise him back to life in the spring after he dies.
There you go. Yes. So it's very important. We actually had a panel about that yesterday.
And she is, of course, associated with the moon.
Yes, she is. So
the
moon. And if you remember in the series, George R. Martin has compared woman to moon. When they talk about the origin of dragons, and was it Erie? She said,
One day there was a second moon in the sky, and water too close to the sun and cracked from all the heat, and 1,000 dragons poured forth and drank the fire of the sun, and that's why dragons breathe flame.
Okay, thank you. And Aries, she says, no, dragon is not moon. Moon is God, woman, wife of sun. So what? Woman is the moon. And so the way that the triple goddess is actually depicted is a waxing moon, which is a moon that's, growing, it's maturing, it's getting larger. A full moon, which is a completely full, mature moon. And a waning moon, which is a moon that's withering. So it actually, I brought pictures. It looks like something like this, if I can find it. So it looks something like this. So you have your waxing moon, your waning moon, and you have your full moon, and it looks like that. And so George R. R. Martin, he likes to put shout-outs to, bless you, little different nods and concepts and mysteries and sigils that are crests that he puts in the storybook. And I did not, this is not something that I picked out. There is a really smart guy named Blue Tiger in the forums. He has a website called the Amber Compendium, And please check that out. He's a really smart guy.
If you like Tolkien and A Song of Ice and Fire
Yeah.
analysis, then definitely check it out.
But George R.R. Martin, he kind of puts certain concepts into his sigils, specifically little-known houses. And this is the house of House Harclay. And it is a waxing moon, a full moon, and a waning moon. So it's kind of interesting there.
Now it's time for some human sacrifice.
So he's kind of making a shout out to that specific concept right there, which is pretty interesting.
And I want to actually say something about that, but let's kick it over to that side of the table and we'll come back to this.
I was thinking about you talking about the 3 male archetypes, the 3 female archetypes, and how, maybe the women get the short end of that particular stick because they're just all about, you're about to breed, you're breeding, you're past your breeding time. Whereas
totally
the
agree.
men are like the father who's the boss and the warrior who kicks butt and the smith who makes the tools that allows the warrior to kick butt. But I also thought like that's an interesting dichotomy between the natural world and the world that man makes. Like the women as it has a full life cycle. That's something that all living things go through. You're born, you mature, you die. Whereas the men, on the men's side, it represents man's mastery over nature, their ability to harness technology, their ability to govern themselves and make laws.
Yeah, 3 adults, 3 adult men.
Yeah, and use those things to enforce those laws. And I wondered if there was something, interesting in that kind of dichotomy between natural order and imposed order.
So, with women, I think that they're always depicted as, the divine feminine, very natural, and men are always trying to kind of overcome things and overcome society. At least that's like the kind of the concept that you try and see. One of the things that I do see is what George does with some of the characters who try and overcome some of those barriers or some of those, I guess, different societal roles that the faith is trying to do. And a good example of that would probably be Brienne. Brienne has pretty much rejected all of her male suitors. She remains a maiden even though she's fully grown, and she has no desire to have children at this time. And she's actually become the embodiment of the warrior, even though she's actually a woman.
And Catelyn, when she's praying at the sept, she looks at the warrior's face and sees Robb and Jaime, and then just Brienne for a second. I saw Brienne too.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But what happens when a woman actually rejects those roles? She actually goes into she doesn't become really the warrior. She actually turns into something like the stranger, something that is really depicted very well with Arya, who does the same thing. And Arya actually goes to the House of Black and White. She becomes no one. She becomes basically the embodiment of the stranger.
She's the night wolf. She's a faceless man who's not a man or a girl. Yeah, there's a lot of death goddess and gender flipping. Of course, Arya does the most gender flipping of anyone in the book. She poses as a boy joining the Night's Watch. She poses as a boy a couple of times, actually. And of course, right after Ned's killed, first thing Yoren is like, boy, you're not a smart boy, are you, boy? And it's like, pretty emphasized. So.
Exactly.
But so what A.Ron was getting into and what you were getting into, I have seen this, like the 3 roles of women in Westeros. It's very defined by patriarchy. Here you are, you're either innocent and chaste like a maiden, or you're making babies, or you're old and dried up, and you might have some interesting things to say, but you're basically a crone. And so now the triple goddess in Celtic mythology is not defined quite that way. So George has basically taken the triple goddess idea and strapped it down to a Catholic look-alike with the faith of the 7, because Westeros is very patriarchal. But then he's filled the story with all these women that don't fit into any of those roles. It's not just Brienne. Think about all the women who are out about their sexuality, like Arya and Martell. Think about, not sexuality, but Arya obviously defines many archetypes, or defies many archetypes. There's Cersei Lannister, who a lot of her arc is basically her getting mad that Jaime's a guy and she isn't, and she can't swing the sword, and she's, chafes against all the limits against women in medieval culture. And there's more and more, but this.
Yeah, I was wondering if we look through the canon, if you can find an example for every one of those, like of a woman who is embodying the masculine side of the godhood. Like, for example, you thought Brienne is the warrior. You mentioned Cersei taking the role of the father and being the queen regent.
Well, the father judges and Stoneheart judges, so I think Stoneheart would be a good example of that.
Yeah,
I mean, she's all about judgment.
Also, Dany too has that power, leadership, and judgment. But
the Khaleesi, the word Khaleesi has Khal in it, so she's basically like the Queen Khal. I mean,
is there anyone that embodies? Is there a woman that embodies the builder? Like, that's the one that I was trying to think of.
Maybe like an innkeep.
What about Sorella or Aurelius, who we think is Sorella? At the Citadel.
Yeah,
like, the Smith embodies like human ingenuity and technology, and we see that she's like one of the fastest of the acolytes to forge a bunch of links on her chain.
Well, there's a little bit of,
and she's also there's a gender bend there too, because this is not like canon. Sure. This is a theory, but
it's pretty much canon.
Yeah, right. At this point.
We all can flip a word backwards.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, that's a great point. And I think that's, oh God, what was I just going to say? Go ahead, Amanda, I'll come back to it. Or Quinn, actually, let's get Quinn on the mic.
Yeah, I think one of the most interesting parts about all this is how these archetypes embody themselves in characters in the story. Like you mentioned Arya before. And then I think Catelyn might be a good example of maybe the mother.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, and
like the mother turned stranger almost.
Yeah, mother turned stranger.
Mother merciless. Because the mother is supposed to be merciful. Yeah. And so we hear Mother merciless.
Mother merciless, exactly. So it kind of gets flipped on its head. Because she literally dies and becomes like this vengeful death spirit kind of.
It's a collector of souls.
So Amanda, you made a similar point at the beginning. When you look at the male archetypes, they are also meant to keep man in line. You either make weapons, you swing those weapons, or you as the father, you sit in judgment and rule. And so it's like, it's definitely, and when you see the ruling characters, you see that it's no picnic. Like, it's nothing but pressure and obligation and duty and stuff. So I think it's really interesting the way these archetypes are set up by Martin and then defied by his characters, and he's doing a lot of interesting tension with that.
Yeah, he does a great job with Sam Tarly as well, because we see him going to the wall, and he goes to the wall because he's too feminine, he's too soft. He's not a good representation of his family, who's a family of hunters, really, is what they're best known for. And so he's actually sent to the wall because he says that he's a craven, he's a coward. And so they actually talk about not even promoting him to be a member of the Night's Watch, because they can't really find a good spot for him. You see, the wall actually is a good example of some of those archetypes. So what do you have? You have the builders, right? And the builders are a good parallel to what the smith is, right? The smith builds.
For sure.
So absolutely, and then the rangers, right? The warrior. So that's another example right there. And then the last one is help me out.
Big Daddy Crow. That's the father, Blood Raven.
The stewards there, and that's kind of an analog to the father. Well, they kind of do, but remember he was saying, but we're stewards. Can he do this? Can he do that? And it was all stuff with their hands as well. So
and John being made a steward was basically signifying him being in line for Lord Commander too. So.
Yeah, and the Lord Commander.
At the beginning, he was very upset. He felt almost like it was an emasculating thing. What am I going to sew fancy small clothes and make it bad?
I wonder if there's a statement being made about true leadership having to sort of transcend some of that.
Bring yourself down a little bit, yeah.
Yeah. And like we have the wise rulers like getting the perspective of the people, like Aegon Egg, Go ahead, A.Ron.
It was also Sam that is kind of typically portrayed as kind of like soft and weak, especially in the early goings, that had to help John appreciate that, which I think is not unintentional.
His father was going to kill him in that way. That
Yeah.
outside of the expectations, his father said he would literally kill him.
That's a great point. And that's like one of the most visceral, like Sam talking about his abusive father was one of those that like, it really gets you.
Well, that's the other thing about the Faith of the Seven is like that each aspect has its dominant qualities, but they're connected in that seven-sided star, so they all kind of like orbit around each other's gravity. So the Father is not entirely without mercy, and he's also clever and ingenious, and he also, has the strength to enforce his concept of justice, and he's tempered by the Mother's mercy, and I gotta say, as you're talking about that, it's much easier to see how the masculine qualities are tempered by the female than how is the crone tempered by, or how is the maiden tempered by the crone, or tempered by the warrior. I'm sure, like if I read the 7-pointed star, if we ever get the full text of that, there's probably whole chapters, but that's.
So that's actually straight from European folklore with the triple goddess and stuff. The horned god represents male virility, which can be wild and untamed, and if not tamed and if left unchecked, it turns negative. And it is partially the role of the triple goddess to sort of tame that male virility. So that's right out of that.
Yeah. Yin and yang. Yin and yang.
They balance each other out. There's a part of each one inside the other.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And you do see that, like, for example, with the mother and the warrior. I guess that you've never seen a mama bear or a mama lion get angry. You see that with Catelyn when Bran is threatened. She tries bite his face off, and
she grabs the knife with her hands.
Grabs the knife with her hands, and she does a really excellent job of defending her son, and very briefly, just becoming the embodiment of the warrior.
Or how about Bear Island with that statue?
Oh, there you go.
Well, also they, Brienne, who embodies the warrior, even says of Catelyn that you have a feminine type of courage and that strength.
And a woman's battle is in the birthing bed and in other places.
Exactly.
So let's talk about the stranger. The stranger is cool. Quinn, why don't you kick us off with some stranger danger?
Well, the stranger is he represents, I think, the unknown. That's why he's got kind of death and.
The void.
Yeah, void. The House of Black and White, he's a part of their whole deal. I mean, they take...
Yeah, go into that. Let's talk about the House of Black and White religion. That's probably a good topic, actually.
Yeah, so the stranger, but the stranger's not the only one that's there. It's all of them.
Yeah, they're the interesting thing about that religion is they look at all the commonalities between all the religions, and they see that out of every religion has some kind of veneration or respect for death, and they've kind of seen that as the universal theme. So that's the most powerful god, and that's the only thing it's like death and taxes. That's the only sure thing. So. They have in the House of Black and White, there's a shrine to every one of the gods of death throughout Westeros and Essos.
Right. The title "Hymn of Many Faces" is just more archetype talk.
Right, and they're just saying there's only one. And
right.
Everybody has their different version, but they don't consider it, separate.
It all leads to the same place.
So some of the people that embody the stranger in the story. Stannis, when he's attacking King's Landing, somebody says, he's the stranger come to judge us. Arya is basically my favorite stranger character because that's what she's being shaped into. And in fact, there's the other one is Dany, because Dany has a side of, it's not just the vengeful mother, but the goddess Kali. And so Kali means Kali the Black. And Kali represents, the coolest way I've heard it said, is the void in between the stars, the blackness in between the stars, the eternal womb tomb. Basically, it means that the same place that is death is also the seeds of new life. And so inside the womb is dark, almost like the grave, but out of it emerges new life. And so Kali exists before and after the universe. She's before everything, and she's after everything. And again, of course, I apologize if I'm getting any of the details wrong, but that is roughly what's going on. And there is really heavy Kali symbolism with Quaithe and Dany and that whole tent scene of dancing shadows and giving your baby to the darkness. And there's also three-headed trios who talks about, one head consumes the dying and the other one gives birth to the living. We don't know what the middle head does. The middle head is the in-between. It's the void, it's the bardo, it's the womb tomb, the cosmic womb tomb. And this is a really fun concept. So even though the stranger is death, if you listen to the kindly man at the house of not Undying, the House of Black and White, he talks about the dark angel that sort of follows you around, and when you're too tired, you need to set your burden down. He guides you home. So it's kind of a different way of looking at the god of death, and it fits into. We were talking about nature cycle mythology yesterday, and it fits into the whole thing of death paying for life and paving the way for new life.
I think it's also interesting that Tyrion most identifies with the stranger because he feels as himself as an other and as a kind of something that doesn't fit into the natural order of his society.
And he's definitely a monstrous, all his nicknames are Monkey Demon.
Right. I thought that was always interesting. That and of course he's not a particularly shining example of any kind of faith, but to the extent
he could be bringing death and judgment to Westeros, though, for sure.
Sure.
It's funny you mentioned Dany being death because she actually embodies multiple ones. Like she is the maiden. At one point she's the mother. I mean, she really is the mother. She's Misa. So it's
Mother of Dragons and the mother, Mysa,
And she's also I think it hinted towards in the books, but they actually made it explicit last season in the show. She's barren, which puts her into crone territory as well.
So she is the embodiment of the triple goddess.
She might not be.
Yeah,
well,
John means, are you sure?
Yeah.
Shouldn't we at least check?
Yeah.
I mean, I tend to think that she's not because the end of A Dance with Dragons when she's bleeding, I feel like the berries gave her a miscarriage. That's what I think.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing to find out, exactly what's going on with Dany. Mm-hmm. And also, John, of course, resurrected John in the books might not be quite as functional as TV resurrected John, so we'll have to see how that works. So, by the way, everyone in this room, the next time you go to a George R. Martin speaking event, you're all compelled now to ask, does resurrected John have blood flow? That's the question. We need the answer.
Doesn't Beric Dondarrion bleed?
No, he does, but George said his heart doesn't beat.
Congealed,
because he did state, in that interview, that there was no flowing blood, right?
That is what he said.
I guess if you cut him, then it flows out.
Yeah.
It isn't solidified, but yeah. Where did we go? We went sideways. So let's go. We got a little time for some. We got plenty of time, but let's get some audience questions. And we've thrown out a lot of things, so it could be questions or comments right there.
Why do you think the Andals developed the stranger the way it is into the religion? Like that particular weird embodiment.
Maybe.
I think they're just putting a face on the thing that all religions struggle with, because anything that is like a universal, God is good, so why does evil exist? And, eventually there's some of these big questions that all religions kind of grapple with, and you get to the bottom, and it's always like, what the Lord acts in mysterious ways. They're just putting a face on that.
He's that dark shadow.
This is the stuff this is the sum total of the things we don't know. And it's actually it's pretty good defensive theology, because it's like anything that can't be explained, well, it's the stranger.
Yeah.
We used to, when I was a kid, me and my sister blamed everything on Ralph. That we did. We're like, Ralph did it. Who's Ralph? I don't know.
Ralph is the stranger.
Totally.
Ida No from the Family Circus was actually an embodiment of the stranger. The little goat. You're just a fan. I'm too old. Sorry. There's no gray hair in this audience.
Okay, in the back, in the blue hat or black hat.
If you consider Dany and Jon to be multiple positions in the God level, because she's both barren and the mother, and Jon has died, but is also the warrior. Is there a possibility that they could?
Well, what we have to remember is that there's 7 aspects of one. So yes, I think people definitely manifest different archetypes at different times. And I've seen a lot of theories where people try to find 7 specific people and match them up. Those never really, they're always kind of blurry because everyone shifts. Transformation is probably the most important concept in the entire book. So everyone's personal transformation, resurrections, magical transformation, it's everywhere. So. Go ahead, do you want to expand on that?
Yeah, what I'm asking is basically because they have kind of made the whole life cycle, do you think there's a possibility that would be able to create a child? Because of the fact that she's both the mother and the crone, has that inside her, and he has been both.
I see where you're going with that. Yeah, no, it could be Martin implying that nothing is permanent, and so even if Danny thinks she's barren, it's going to come around again. Yeah, I could see that. And John has really strong stranger symbolism. Like when he's thinking about leaving the watch, he's like, "Oh, I'd be the outsider, the outcast, the one no one knows, and the face in the shadows." And he dresses in black a lot.
If you look at people as tools, like the way Littlefinger uses other people, could Sansa or Cat possibly be like a representation of the Smith?
Well, wouldn't it be Littlefinger, the Smith, like making the tools, making people into
Sansa's
tools?
at least an apprentice Smith, and
Oh yeah, okay, yeah, absolutely. That's a different way to look at a Smith.
That is.
That's interesting.
some manipulation can be a way to manifest a smithery.
Yeah, because creating reality is definitely creation, and that's what you're doing by manipulating people.
Get people to do your work for you. I mean, isn't that a tool?
Yeah.
Yeah. Watch out for her.
Can you catch me up, because I've been spending much time on Reddit lately. Is George planning some kind of supplemental on religion? Did I hear it?
It's called A Song of Ice and Fire. Sorry, I don't mean to be smart.
I mean, is he writing anything?
Oh no! That I was making
be
a joke
cool.
because that's in universe. That's the
equivalent of
Holy
the
Bible
Yeah.
for that faith.
We almost started a rumor.
I know, right?
Yeah, a horrible rumor.
Don't give him any ideas because he will.
So after Fire and Blood, ladies and gentlemen, I've decided we're going to put Tiao off, and the 7-pointed star is going to come out next.
Oh, that'd be a boring one right there.
Kind of back on the stranger talk with Danny and John and almost Sansa when she goes away from the maiden towards the stranger. It's like all our chemical characters are now going towards the stranger. Is there any significance there on them fighting the Night King, which is kind of the ultimate embodiment of the stranger? It seems like everybody has developed towards that. And that's the final.
It's kind of like people have to pass under the light, pass under the shadow in order to reach the light. It seems like a lot of people are doing that, aren't they?
Well, and with transformation, all the characters that didn't transform, like you think of Eddard as the father. He didn't change, so he died.
Oh, that's interesting.
All the inert static characters that couldn't evolve.
I agree with that. Yes.
Yeah.
You don't know she's dead.
So that fits the arc of the story because we're heading into winter and basically the darkest time of the story. And what's coming after that would be spring. And so the stranger needs to come and basically kill and pave the way for the cycle to begin again. So maybe that's why we see so many stranger archetypes. Let's get some over this side. In the gray, yeah.
Another thing that I've thought is that to some extent the stranger, because we have the old gods and the new, to some extent was the stranger an adaptation? That's not really the right word, but the seven absorbed the old gods and turned them into the stranger. So you've got the Weirwoods, Heart's Tree, all of that. Is that itself what, did that evolve into it? Are they trying to turn the stranger into, or turn that?
It's like they have to give an answer for everything. It's like, well, what's that? Oh, well, that's fucked up. That's the stranger for sure. And then there's a related point, which is a question of how much of the faith of the seven developed in Andalos versus Westeros, because we actually don't know that. The only thing we have in Andalos is like some old myths and carvings of axes and stuff. We don't know, like, if the stranger maybe wasn't even an original part, maybe it came about later. It's possible. You're right next to you, right there.
Back at the beginning, you were saying something about how it seemed that the female archetypes of the seven were somewhat shortchanged, but I really don't see it that way. And it's because they're not shortchanged. They're handled the task of continuing society. And their consent in things matters very much in terms of the way the faith receives it. That is, a woman can't be compelled to give up her maidenhood. A woman can't be compelled into marriage.
We're talking about Westeros, right?
Yeah, I was about to say.
I'm thinking of the wedding of Sansa.
Westerosi society.
Technically, by the law, is right there. By the law, you cannot be compelled to marry.
Well, I mean, yeah. I mean, the father can send her to the Silent Sisters if she doesn't want to take that husband.
Going to the Silent Sisters if she wanted to.
Well, I mean, or he could just kick her out onto the street, too. But, I mean, really, a woman needs her father's leave for just about anything. We're still, even though, I guess, you could say that they have their own free will, for the most part, women are still looked at as property, and their worth is very much tied to their ability to have children.
Yeah, that's kind of the point.
If you take a look at,
comes from within.
well, I mean that's a very altruistic way to look at it, but really, a woman's worth is looked at their ability to have children. If you look at Brienne, and when she was captured, and they were trying to ransom her, the thing that was most important is, does she have her maidenhead? If she doesn't have her maidenhead, she's worthless. She's no longer a maiden. I can't give her to anybody that's really going to do anything with her. So she's worthless, and I don't want her back. And so that's woman's worth. And then you take a look at when they tried to ransom Arya and Sansa for Jaime. They were talking about how, like, they just got the raw end of the deal. Like, why would that is such a bad deal? Why would anybody, trade Jaime Lannister for 2 girls? I mean, even though I think it's a pretty good deal, but really I think it's a pretty good deal, but really women were worthless. And he shows it time and time and time again. And you can take a look at it from that really moral perspective, but
I wouldn't call Olenna Tyrell worthless in the least, and I don't think her family would either.
I don't think anybody called anybody worthless.
Yeah, it's like the story of like Arya and Brienne are the fact that this like one size fits all doesn't fit anybody. Like maybe 90% of the women in Westeros are content to be mothers and maidens and crones, but what about the 10%? You got society saying, well, it doesn't matter, you got to be in that box. Even Ned is like, no, you want to be a princess and you're going to marry, and she's like, I don't want it. I want to hold a sword and I want to fight.
From the society and not necessarily from faith.
Well, but faith does.
The faith is a reflection of the society. It's created to enforce the societal mores. That's what religion does. Let's get right there in the brown.
So going back to the previous comment, I think a lot of what George is trying to do with how he's constructing this 7 is a lot of your Christianity of taking in. I thought that comment was really interesting about the stranger, because it's taking pagan religions and bringing them into Christianity and incorporating them into the same concept. George kind of does that with already how he's setting up the triple goddess, but he's taking that within the world itself, and that they are also appropriating their own like native religions that they're trying to bring in and find a place for in their own structure.
Exactly. They did that with the Ironborn, actually.
I was just going to say that. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, okay.
No, go ahead.
Oh, you can. Okay.
No, it's you.
So with the Ironborn, they actually tried to bring in the Faith of the 7, which ended horribly, but they did try and bring in the Faith of the 7. And what they did was they tried to incorporate the Faith of the 7 with the Drowned God. And so eventually they tried to make it like 8 aspects of one God, and they decided that that wasn't working out. So they eventually incorporated the Drowned God to the stranger, is what they did. And so that's just, kind of a amalgamization of that in the attempt of kind of meshing the two together.
So George shows us like a failed experiment of cultural sort of assimilation.
Very failed.
I've kind of noticed how before a character can be whole, they have to kind of accept both the male and the female part of themselves. So a lot of our male characters, like your Jaimes and your Johns, who are these warriors, they have to go through something that breaks down their manhood, like Jaime when he's being a prisoner, and John when he has to be a steward, to kind of even Theon.
He was making that point earlier.
Yes. Yeah.
They have to kind of accept both. And then you have the women who accept more of a male, you have Arya's and your Brienne's. Then you have a complete character, the one God.
Exactly.
And then you can go fight the White Walkers.
Yeah, it's like a reconciliation. Yeah, I love that.
That's
really
good. Yeah, I think that's a good.
So I'm seeing the Faith of the 7 as like comparable to Catholicism, and then I'm seeing also the religion of R'hllor as like, I'm not really sure what to compare it to. But
Zoroastrianism.
Yeah, Zoroastrian.
Thank you. But you know how like that the Lord of Light also has like the other side, like the dark.
Yeah.
Dualism.
Shadow.
Yeah, it's a dualistic religion.
I'm really seeing that in the Faith of the 7. So like we're talking about the stranger, that he's kind of like he represents death, and he has kind of like that demonic like other side, but he's not. He's an aspect of the 7, so he has his own altar, and people do go and pray in front of him and light candles. So I just find it interesting that the Faith of the 7, unlike Catholicism, doesn't have like a Satan figure, but we still have like a morality, like a moral code, like homosexual behavior is wrong, and fornication is wrong, and I'm trying to think of all the different sins that, and incest is wrong, and you know what I mean? So it's just interesting that they have these moral, these sins, right? But there's no kind of like...
Yeah, they don't hold hell over you to like, it's more like societal shame that's held over you,
exactly.
I'd say.
So there's no, right, so there's no creature in hell who's going to, where you're gonna, that you're gonna be assigned to if you do.
Yeah, that's what I just said. I was like, it's more like Hinduism. It's like a cultural shame is what holds them in, not like a fear of going to hell.
Yeah.
That it's like you will be shamed within it's collectivism society rather than
your punishment is now.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you. Oh, you and then you. Yeah, go ahead.
I just had a question to build on because it was something I was thinking about recently. So where does that faith of Rolor, because there is some elements of Christianity in there with, the whole, there's one God.
Yeah, highly dualistic.
There's the devil, and then they're very evangelical, and it's our obligation to force this religion on.
Everything's binary, black and white.
Right.
Yeah.
Burning heretics and things like that. So I wondered where that fits in with the idea of Christianity. I know that the seven has been, kind of like you talked about, Catholicism and all that, but I also see those other elements with the faith of the Lord.
Yeah, it's like the most extreme sort of crusader kind of Christianity almost, like just wipe out the heathens, but I don't know, we'll have to see. I think it'll be interesting to see what if the red priests, like if all the Rolor followers in Volantis link up with Dany and end up in Westeros and, I don't know, have a religious conference with the Sparrows. That could be violent.
The thing about
it's also, I think it's, I don't know if this is a controversial point, but I always thought it was interesting that the Faith of the Seven is like the one inert religion in Westeros. Like, Rolor has some power behind him. Like, you can beseech him, he can perform miracles. The old gods, can create the others. They can resurrect ice dragons. They can, there's... but the Faith of the Seven is this like kind of like dead wood that's just purely propped up by human tradition, and it does seem like it makes sense that look, if I will go outside a convention and there was like some person conjuring fire and flame and resurrecting the dead, I'm an atheist, but I would sign up for that religion. So
also a pyromaniac.
Yeah.
So in the green shirt and then over there in the orange. Go ahead.
You kind of started touching on my questions, but I was going to ask how big of a role you thought these religions were going to play, like, in the end game. We've got, like, the White Walkers, and you're just saying, like, clearly, like, in the world, at least, like, the Red God, there's clearly some power, or he's real, or exists, or something does. The same with the old gods. There's clearly something there, so... I just kind of
I think it's primarily, the most important thing is how it motivates people in the story. Like everyone, the religion factors into either subtly into their worldview or more specifically like Melisandre into her specific belief set and her actions. So,
and that's one of the central questions, honestly, the central mysteries that still remains in the books and the show is like, is Martin going to put his thumb on one side of the scale or not? Is there going to be like some kind of universal power that there's a dualism that's tapped into? Is there an intelligence behind that? Can it be harnessed like electricity, or can it be beseeched like an actual god? Like, I know he's made, you said that like Martin says he doesn't create gods, but like he kind of has.
Well, he's created power, yeah. And I think it gets back into what I was saying about like people invented storm gods because they dealt with the sea, and the sea is powerful, especially when you're at its mercy.
Sure.
And so people perceive the essence of fire as Rolor. Right, so is there a person named Rolor sitting in a throne room? I mean, probably not.
Right.
But this fire, it has power and personality, and the personality of fire is Rolor.
Does the universe itself have some sort of personal power and intent? I think that's an interesting question that we'll have to...
Religions are formed around the nature of reality, right? So who really knows where Melisandre's power comes from, right? She thinks it comes from Rolor,
right? And also, like her antithesis, the evil version, the Great Other has the similar powers. Like it can resurrect people from the dead, and not necessarily just an evil zombie form. Look at Cold Hands.
He's running on ice magic. Yeah.
He's ice and blood raven. Is he a good guy or bad guy? Ultimately, that's kind of something that's still mysterious. Euron seems to call on that power of those old gods that is in direct opposition, but it does feel like there is a dualism there.
Okay, so in the flame orange dress. Speaking of flame.
So speaking of flames, there is a god that's like it's an extinct religion. It's mentioned in the Old Testament of the Torah called, I think, Baal.
Baal.
It was like a bull or something. And it's all about burnt offering. That was like a huge theme of the religion. So I definitely think there's a few different extinct religions. I mean, there's a few things from like Native American religions that are in there. So I do think he's pulling something other than just Zoroastrianism, Christianity.
I found Mesoamerican myth, Chinese myth, Japanese myth, a lot of Vedic Indian myth.
Well, it's just
I mentioned Kali earlier.
Just like the War of the Roses might provide a framework for like the first 3 books, but he also then plugs in other historical facts because you can't just, you got to remix that. So like, yes, it might be the core of the dualism is the Zoroastrianism, but then he pulls in other things to give it a more unique take and to feel like a lived-in religion.
Right there, you had your hand up a while.
Sort of going to what Aaron and Elmel were saying of what the power of the religion is coming from, so not necessarily looking at it as what God is providing the power, but sort of what source is that religion drawing on for power. For Rolor, maybe it is this blood magic or this other magic power that they're tuning into and calling that a part of their religion. For the North, we know that the children do have power and that there is some northern magic piece of that. For the 7, for a long time, I thought that there wasn't anything that was like inert, nothing's really going on there. But they really have the power of the people. And we see that with the Sparrow Uprising. And they're pulling on the power of society, which is sort of what we're talking about with not having like a hell that's hanging over them. Society and cultural constraints are providing the power that is really fueling where anyone in that religion is pulling their power from.
That's cool. And power is obviously one of the huge topics of this story. And George Martin loves to write about power, whether it's actual magical power or political power or social power. So that's a good comparison.
It's interesting that you mentioned like the people, because the 7, unlike R'hllor or the old gods, they are people. It's like the mother, the maiden, the crone. So that's interesting.
That's true. It's a lot easier to identify with the father or the smith than a fire demon or the drowned god.
Yeah.
I think further to her point too, we've got this question about Old Town, and Old Town and the Citadel is something that's able to come into existence in part because of the structure that religion provides to the 7 kingdoms. And what we may have in there in the basement is a book that tells people how to defeat dragons. So there is a counterbalance from this. I mean, we talked about the strength of the old religion, we talked about the strength of the Lord, but there is a strength in that seemingly inert religion to allow humans to come up with power to counter those other.
Right, and to his question earlier, I was saying the most important thing about all these religions is the way that it shapes the character's beliefs and actions. Because ultimately, like Martin says over and over, it's all about the hearts in conflict of the characters. Everything else feeds into that, and it acts as context for that.
Davos believes that the mother saves him, and that's all that matters. It's that he believes it.
So, the title of this panel, Deconstructing the Archetypes of the 7. You were making a point that I want to touch on, which is that even though we have these constricting archetypes and societal roles for women, we have amazing women that deconstruct those archetypes themselves without openly defying them. You don't have to defy them in the way that Brienne or Arya does in order to subvert them. Like you mentioned Olenna Tyrell. Olenna Tyrell is an amazingly powerful character. She's wise, she pulls the strings. Mace is like her little puppet, basically. So no one would call her powerless or pathetic or anything like that. So Asha Greyjoy, yep, that's another one who's playing with it. And Catelyn has incredible strength, and she's the quintessential mother. But she's got a lot of power in that role, and I think that's something that everybody that's a woman in this crowd knows about. Like, you have to learn how to deal with society the way it is and how to get ahead in a patriarchal world. That's just the plain facts of it. Even while you choose to defy it, it's like, you don't want to fight the revolution every moment of every day. And so you're constantly forced to make these choices. Same thing for people of color or anybody that's not, the normative status, is you have to deal with all these choices and find ways to choose when you're going to fight openly and when you're going to sort of subvert. And I think that there's a lot of women that are subverting and deconstructing their own archetypes. And also for men, like you were saying, Sam, is a very good flip of that. So
I was going to ask, in terms of how it's influenced characters' arcs, we talked about Dani in regards to the 7 archetypes, but she doesn't listen to 7. She might have learned them when she was young. Her religious time has been really with the Dothraki, and then kind of seeing Meereen and overthrowing Meereen. How have you seen religion influence her character's arc? She still kind of seems to accept some of the Dothraki lore.
Well, Dani herself is actually the new religion. Quinn,
That's
you
right,
want to
yeah.
give your spiel on that, Dani or Quinn?
Huh? Oh, Dani? Well, yeah, she's like the Misa. She's the mother. I always say that, like, in a few thousand years, they'll look back on Daenerys as, like, kind of a goddess. She brought dragons back into the world for the first time. She freed the East. She maybe united all the Khalasars under one ruler. This is like legendary. I always point to the beginning of A Feast for Crows, where you have the young members of the Citadel talking about Daenerys, and they're saying that, oh, she conquered Astapor and she conquered Meereen and she has dragons, and they think this all can't possibly be true, but it is, because she's myth. She's a mythological figure.
Yeah, like a living myth. So Martin is almost showing us the age of heroes with Dani, and it's like, this is how these myths are created. And she's not even done. Who knows what her story will be by the time she's done. So it is now time. It is 1:50. I'd like to thank all of you for joining us, and thank you for all the great audience participation. Great questions, guys. A very special thank you to all of my patrons and everyone who donated to the Con of Thrones fundraiser live stream. I couldn't have done it without you, so I hope you enjoy. Thanks, everyone. From the bottom of my fiery, fiery heart.